such a great occasion, and we're so glad that you're part of it. You know, we have three of the greatest generation. It makes you choked up. It's just awesome. They saved the world, and they saved me by coming today and doing this wonderful talk. Is that better? Yeah. My name is Carol May, and I'm one of the three directors of the Friends of the Richards DAR House Foundation. Raise your hand, please. Dottie, and where is Carrie? She's out in the hall. Are also directors, and our main function is to provide assistance and support to the DAR House. Of course, you know this magnificent 1860s house is just one of the treasures of Mobile. And the president of our house is in the hall, right there. There she is. She'll be talking to you in just a moment. But thank you for this great occasion to honor our World War II soldiers. Probably most of us in this room had a father or grandfather or cousin or uncle, and you never get over realizing the debt that they have created for us. They literally saved the world. We know that. And I do believe that America still will respond in time of emergency. I believe it's there. I taught high school, and I know how the kids work. We do have some special guests today before we get to these wonderful men. And of course, the commander of the ATC, would you please stand for me? Captain Holster, would you like to say anything?
Anything I would say will pale in comparison to what these gentlemen will share, but I would just say for any of the military that are here in this great city, not a day goes by that we don't know that we are standing on your shoulders. Every single one of us knows that we're standing on the shoulders of all the people in the greatest generation. The only Coast Guard hero that is a recipient of the Medal of Honor came from World War II, and that's Douglas Monroe. And he died saving a number of Marines on a beach in Guadalcanal. So every coastie knows that story. So when we see people like you, I agree. I agree with you, ma'am. I agree with you, Sandra. This is an honor. So thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you.
You will meet another guest from the city of Mobile. He's military liaison with the Coast Guard and with the military, I believe, overall. Captain Snowden, who will be doing a special presentation at the end of this. Okay, today we want to welcome you, but also to invite you to be a member of the Friends. And it's a $25 membership, which means you get to come events like this free. All of our book signings, we have 1 or 2 a month, and we would love you to do that because all of our funds go to maintain the DAR House. This is a treasure. It's also a center for culture and learning. Pete Green, many of you know, is so civic-minded and does everything and can't say no when we call and say, Pete, I need you to MC this, and he does, in fact. And I'm going to turn this over to Pete because we don't want to waste your time with our guest today. Pete, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mom.
You're welcome.
Y'all don't know, but this is my Alabama mom. And long story, but I don't know how many years ago, 15 or something years ago, she said something like, you asked me how old I was, and she said, well, I could be your mother. And I said, well, I don't have one in Alabama. And ever since then, she's been my Alabama mom. And I'm forever indebted to her and the Daughters of the American Revolution, because she's kind of touched on it. They preserve our heritage. They preserve our traditions. They teach that heritage and tradition to all those people, but they're also active in service. And that's kind of, and I mean service in things that they do now like this, but also other things. And I wanted to mention, that's kind of how we got into this, you help me, I help you, because a couple years ago, the USS Mobile was being commissioned here, and we wanted to have a barbecue for the crew and their families. And you know who jumped right on that to set that up and serve the barbecue for the crew? Mom! And the rest of the Daughters of the American Revolution were there, and it was a great thing. So they do that kind of stuff. So when they call and say, hey, you got to do the MC for this? Yes, ma'am. That's the only appropriate answer. And I don't want to take too long because Mom has talked about it, but this is one of the great things about America, and in particular about Alabama, and even more particular about Mobile. This is America's city. This is a patriotic city because we know how important the history and the legacy of our heroes are, that we don't forget, that we remember, and that we pass it on, and that everybody that hears things today will pass it on and share it. And I wish there would be a whole lot more young people here, because the one overarching thing I want to say for all three of our guests is most of the really incredible stuff they did, they were like young. They were like teenagers. And I always think that's amazing.
Amen.
When you talk to some of these young teenagers, you go, you really ought to hear what previous generations did at your age. So that's why it's so great that we're here today to commemorate that and to hear from these guys, which I know all three of them for a long time because they are all veterans of the South Alabama Honor Flight. They all went on Honor Flight, which is almost 10 years ago. So that was a great thing, and I think a lot of y'all were part of it.
10 and 10.
Yeah.
That's when I went.
In 20, so it's been a long time. So I don't want to waste a whole lot of time, but we're going to have a panel in that we're going to let each of these gentlemen tell their story. And it really depends how long it takes. If there will be a question and answer session. So I don't know how long these guys go and how long we can be here, but we may have question and answer after that. But I just want to introduce each one of them, and they're going to tell their story. And the first one up is the baby, the youngest one, who was born in Hollywood, Florida on August 16th, 1925. So he just had a birthday. And he's the baby. And I am not going to read his entire bio. I'm hoping he's going to tell you the bio, because I went through the whole thing last night. But it's really fascinating that he was born in Hollywood, Florida in August 1925. Hurricanes hit. They had to move to Paul, Alabama. And that's how we got to Alabama. But he didn't stay here long, because I can't go through this. But Chester's dad was selling insurance, and they moved a lot. So he went to grammar school in Savannah, Georgia, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Charlotte, North Carolina, Columbus, Georgia, Rossville, Georgia, Mobile, Alabama. I can't keep up with how many, and I don't know if it was 18. So I'll let Chester tell you if it was his dad changing jobs or the teachers chasing him out. But he's got stories about he found his first job at 9. A lot of this is fascinating, and I'm not going to steal his thunder. But they got down here in August of 1940. And then he finally, an interesting thing is he went to Murphy High School, and World War II interrupted. He enlisted in the Navy.
Amen.
He tried to enlist when it first happened, but darn FBI, somebody told him he was only 16 and he couldn't go. But he did eventually enlist in April 1943, served in World War II. Then he came back, and this was the first time I've ever seen this. He came back and went back to Murphy High School to graduate in 1947. Very interesting. And then Chester lost his way and enlisted in the Air Force. I'm a Navy guy, I have to say stuff like that. And I won't go into all that. And then he transferred in the Army. Look, Chester's all over the place. He's done a little bit of everything.
I didn't try the Marines.
He didn't try the Marines. He left those out. He has just done so many things. He's done the bookkeeping. He's had a business. I can't even get into all of it. He's even run for office, City Council, District 6 here in Mobile. And even, and he's always civic-minded. He was the treasurer. Are you still the treasurer for the MOA?
Yeah.
He's still the treasurer for the Military Officers Association.
I filled my own.
Oh, okay. So Phil's is checking, make sure it's all right. But just an incredible story. Chester Feagin, our first World War II hero.
Thank you very much. He told everything. I was born in Hollywood, Florida in 1925 when I was 16. And the hurricane came through. My dad was helping build hotels down there. My dad never went to high school. He went as far as the 7th, and mother went as far as the 5th. So it was a long way up for me keeping up with education on them. But we wound up in Paul, Alabama. Then we went to Columbus, Georgia, where my second brother was born, first brother was born. Then we wound up in Savannah, Georgia, where the second one was born. Then we went to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chattanooga, Tennessee to Charlotte, North Carolina. Back to Chattanooga. And that was a great thing going back there because the Bible was taught in the schools. Sorry about that. When he came to Mobile, Alabama, my mother and daddy had a thing that you could not date until you were 16. And I got here, I was 15. And I asked, when I turned 16, I asked the young lady for a date. She said, "What's your name? What's your mother and daddy's name?" Next day she said, "I can't date you." I said, "Okay." And I found I had an uncle that was deceased, Dr. Fred Feagin. From that day on, I said, "Well, my uncle was Dr. Fred. You can go out with us." But I enlisted in the Navy, and I thought, boy, this is going to be great. I got to Birmingham, went through all the exams. I thought I was going to Great Lakes or to San Diego. Wrong. I wound up at Brunson Field in Pensacola, Florida. Had a long boot camp, 3 weeks. Then we wound up going in and helping build the roads and then buildings, everything else over at Whiting Field. And I put in for electrical school. And the ensign told me, says, "Why did you want to do that? I could keep you here through the whole war." I said, "I didn't come in here to sit on a bench. I come in here to go to overseas or wherever." Wound up in electrical school, went from there to Gyro Company School in San Francisco, which was right across from Alcatraz. The only difference in Alcatraz and Treasure Island, we had Liberty every third night. When I finished there, the only place I ever was where I had to wear blues the whole time around. It was that cold in San Francisco. But then they sent us up to Rhode Island, where we were put in a holding pond for our ship that was being finished in Norfolk, which was an ammunition ship. Then we were the first ammunition ship once we got into the Pacific. We were the first one to ever pass ammunition while underway. Our best day was 720 tons. And I never forgot when we were putting ammunition over to the big mold. Our skipper and Bull Halsey went to school together at Annapolis. And so Bull told him, held over him, "When you gonna get the ammunition?" And we loaded the decks with it and started hollering, "When you gonna take it?" You just didn't pick on the skipper. But I was at Iwo Jima, 500 yards off of it, watching the Marines go up Mount Suribachi. There were 2 flag raisins, I saw both of them. And the Seabees were busy cleaning the runways. And when our airplane started landing, they had never seen a plane that big. And when we went to Okinawa for that invasion, they wouldn't let us get within 35 miles because of the kamikazes. Then we went back into Lady Gov, and we saw Siam and Guam. We saw the whole works while we were there. And we went into Lady Gov, and we went to Japan for the bombardment. And then when we left the bombardment, we went back to Lady Gov and started loading, getting ready for the invasion. And the greatest president we had, Harry Truman, he dropped 2 atomic bombs. And on the 15th day of August, the Japanese surrendered. And the next day, I was no longer a teenager. That was my birthday. But I came home, was glad to get home. I went back to school because when I took the test going in the Navy, I passed. I had so many grades in it. They said, "You could go to one of the officer schools." I said, "Okay." Said, "But you gotta have a diploma." I said, "I don't have one." I said, "You got these grades and didn't have a diploma?" I said, "Yeah, I didn't have time to wait." But I didn't get that, but I had a chance. So when I come home, I got that diploma. During the Korean War, I went back in the service, went in the Air Force, and I applied for a commission in transportation, which I had been doing. I got to Mountain Home Air Force Base. I got the papers from the Air Force turning me down for a commission. Captain came by and said, "Sergeant, want you to teach us lieutenant transportation. He was a brand new second lieutenant right out of journalism in Boston College. Didn't know a meal ticket from caboose. I said, that does it. And I found a one-page regulation, never heard of. Transferred in the Air Force to the Army, went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. In the Air Force, I didn't go to basic training. In the Army, I did go to basic training in leadership school. I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, graduated in July, and then 2 weeks later. So when I come around and got directives down that you could get out if you had 2 years enlisted or commission time, I went home, I told my wife about it, nothing said. I got back that night, there were boxes all the way around the apartment. I said, what's this, Donnie? She says, well, as long as you couldn't get out of this man's army, I was gonna be here. But now that you can, I'm going home, get a job and a place for us to live. If you wanna come, fine. If you don't wanna come, that's fine too. That happened to be a lady that I fell in love with just when I saw her. And we didn't last but 69 years, 2 months, and 27 days. But we came home, I got in the National Guard, enjoyed it. I pulled a few summer camps. The first summer camp I had was every enlisted man, and I hated my guts. When we got through and won all the honors, they didn't hate me that much. But I never forgot the part we were in there. We watched at night when the Japanese had come with a new type landmine, well, not land, but mines. They had them all sunk except one. And if you hit that one, then they all popped up. So we used 20mm guns to pop those, that one, watch them pop up and then shoot the rest of them off. The Japanese were not a surrendering type group. The only way you're going to do anything with them was to kill them. And I was amazed when I was reading something the other day on Iwo Jima. When I was there was 20,000 troops went in. And now it's up to something like 80 or 90. And there wasn't no way you could get 80 or 90,000 men on Iwo Jima. But Iwo Jima was a volcano, just like Hawaii. It was an experience. But I don't look back at that. The only goal I got in life is what's today and what's tomorrow. With that, I got some control. But I'm proud that I served my country. And I would serve my country again today, instantly. Thank you.
Mr. Curtis Hess, born in Pisgah, Alabama in 1923. He made it very clear he did not join the Army. They drafted him right after Pearl Harbor. He was only a teenager, and I'm going to let him tell the story, but he was at Normandy on D-Day and all those things, and then he came back, has lived out his life here. And if you've talked to him already, you know this. He sold advertising for the Mobile Press Register for 35 years. And he's still a salesman. Trust me. And just like these guys are all still active, they're still doing stuff, way up in their 90s, approaching 100. He's still with the Optimist Club. You see all those pins he's got on there? Those little American pins?
Kiwanis.
Oh, is it Kiwanis?
No.
Optimist. Okay, Optimist Club. He's got all those American pins.
58 years.
And he gets me every time I see him, because I have like 30 of them now. But I'm going to go ahead. Y'all just everybody pass $3 up and get the pin, because he's going to make you buy one before it's all over. Because he's that kind of a salesman. But here we have Curtis Hess.
I was not told what I was supposed to do when I came up here, and I didn't prepare my 32-minute speech to let y'all know what I've done, when I've been, and where I've been, and what I want to do, and all that kind of stuff. But I am 99 years old and a half, because I was born in 23 in June, and then we got mighty close to 100. And I've been been promised a birthday party when I get to be 100. I don't know how it's gonna come out, but I know one thing, I'm ready. But I was born in North Alabama, about 50 miles from Chattanooga, a little town called Pisgah. That's out on the mountain from Fort Payne. And I finished high school and started to college, and I was drafted, and Mama got the letter because I was going to Jacksonville State Teachers College when I was going to college. And she got the letter that I'd been drafted, and she cried for 2 days. I said, Mama, we can't help this. I just gotta go. She grinned, and then she cried again. But I was said I was drafted, and I went to Fort McPherson, Georgia, the first trip. And then they sent me to Paris, Texas, and I was trained to be a paramedic. If you don't know what a paramedic does, he glues with two fingers together when they're bleeding. But that's one of the things that we did. But I stayed out in Paris, Texas for 6 weeks, and then they sent me back to Fort McPherson, Georgia. And then from there, they sent me to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, where I was put on the ship and sent overseas, and I was in the invasion of Normandy, France from there. And we had 36 ambulances, and we had 8 a week paramedics. And we take shifts. We had a 48-bed tent that we put up at Normandy after we were pulled up a hill. If you've ever been in that area, you know how that hill is there. That it's about 60 feet high, and then the Corps of Engineers built a bridge, and they pulled us up the next morning, and we put that tent up, and we started to work, and operated out of that tent for 4 weeks. Then we moved from there to Aachen, Germany, where it is about 40 miles away, and we operated there for a little over a month. Then we moved from there into Berlin, because the troops had gone from Aachen, Germany into Berlin in 4 weeks. So that's how Normandy paced up with me and my group. They was 8 of we paramedics. So we had to operate with 36 ambulances being unloaded all the time. And if we were asleep, we had to get up and go to work. So after that, I was in Berlin for another 8 months, and because I was a paramedic, I had to stay there, because they had 4 hospitals, and 2 of them were in buildings, and 2 of them were in 48 bed tents, operate in those all the way through. So after that, I was told that I'd be able to come on home, so I came on back to Pisgah, Alabama, and then I decided after that I'd been in Pisgah, and it snowed in the wintertime, and I just moved to Mobile. So my wife had moved to Mobile. So at that time, she had to get married before I went into service, because she was afraid I wasn't going to come back, and she wasn't going to get that $25 a month. So after that, I moved to Mobile, and I'm still in Mobile ever since.
Tell them about patent kissing.
Tell me about
Pat, you gotta tell the patent thing.
Oh, yeah. You know, you've heard of sugar? We were in the tent that and we had 7 people on these cots, and there was the 8 of us was operating out of the tent, and so he came in, and he had a Jeep in front of him, had 2 soldiers in it, and he had his driver and another soldier, and back of him was another Jeep and 2 more soldiers. So he got out of his tent, out of his Jeep when he came up to us, and he said, "I want each one of you to be still now when I get to you, because we don't want a salute and we don't want anything out of you. All we want to do is to enjoy the fellowship." So he said, "It's in bed. Y'all just stay in bed, and I'll lean over and hug your body." And so he did, and he got to us, and he said, "Curtis," he said, how old are you?" And I told him that I was 17, and he said, you drafted, huh?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, here." He hugged me and kissed me, and went on to John Warren, and went on out there in the Jeep again, and they just went on course.
Mulch, and he's going to tell you a story about how that went and getting captured and being a prisoner of war. He has a lot of awards: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Prisoner of War Medal, World War II Battle of the Bulge Medal. Just a lot of awards. He got done with the war, came back, went to Purdue University, and got a degree in engineering. And then he ran successful businesses in Chicago and Miami. He resided in Miami for 47 years with his wife Natalie and their 3 children. And finally, in February of 2011, he made it to Alabama. He made it to God's country to be closer to family. And we are so pleased that he did make that choice. We're so glad to have him as a friend and neighbor. And he's been so active contributing to the veterans community and our community overall that in 2014, he was the Mobile Bay Area Veteran of the Year for Mobile and Baldwin counties in 2014, and the Patriot of the Year for 2016 for the Military Order of the Purple Heart. And he's been active. He's been active with this, the State Alabama Veterans Board. He served on the State Alabama Veterans Board, appointed by the governor. Are you still on? No, you're just until recently, though. I mean, it was just recently that he got off, and he's written a book about his experiences as a prisoner of war. So I give you Cy Lichtenfeld.
Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Okay. Because I got a loud voice. I want to thank the DAR for having us here today. And it's an honor to be amongst people who serve the community. And my story is going to be a little different than what these gentlemen have been telling you. I'm going to tell you about the war and my participation in the war. For 40 years, I never talked about my experiences. My wife, my kids had no idea what had happened to me. And it was only through my son's effort, when he wanted to take me back to the battlefields, and we found where I fought and everything, that it started to come out. And once the door opened, I then went with other veterans, and we were able to get them into social and PTSD services, of which the Army and the VA had never even considered it. When we left the service in World War II, it was known as shell shock. PTSD was a misnomer, never came around until after the Vietnam War. To start off my story, I was an 18-year-old kid, not having graduated from high school, when I went into the Army. So how did I start my journey to becoming a prisoner of war? My first tour of duty was with the 88th Airborne Battalion, where I was molded into a fighting warrior. I received parachute, glider training, and many in this unit were later to become the cadre for the famous 82nd and the 101st Airborne Divisions. I was later transferred to the 106th Infantry Division, and after further training, shipped overseas to England. And here again, we continued our physical hardening with 25-mile marches with full field packs, weapons, until they became like a walk in the park. Although I complained often and loud, I had no knowledge that this conditioning was to become the huge factor in allowing me to survive. My infantry division went into combat, and I participated in recon and combat patrols. I pulled plenty of outpost duty, alone in the pitch blackness of the night and freezing weather, as this was the coldest winter in Europe in 50 years. Our schedule was 2 hours on and 4 hours off, 24/7. You ate and slept whenever you had a chance. On December the 16th, after having come in off a patrol, at 5:30 in the morning, a continuous artillery barrage hit us for about an hour. The ground shook from the heavy shells that were exploding all around us, and I was thrown out of my sleeping shelf in the dugout. I learned years later that over 250,000 Germans, consisting of 3 armies, hit us that morning, concentrating their efforts on our weakly held positions. What they didn't expect was the tenacity and courage of American infantry, and my unit in particular. Although we were surrounded for 3 days and ammunition was exhausted, the German plan was to wipe us out in the first 12 hours. Our stand disrupted their timetable and allowed American reserves to be rushed into the battle, and eventually over 1 million men fought in what is now known as the Battle of the Bulge. The U.S. suffered over 78,000 killed, wounded, or missing in this battle, the largest land battle the U.S. Army ever fought in. In my case, my foxhole buddy and I only had 11 rounds of ammo left and had not eaten in 2 days. The final attack occurred late in the afternoon of the 3rd day, when white, parka-clad German infantry made a bayonet charge into our lines, tossing hand grenades into our foxholes. After exhausting our final ammo, we jumped out of our foxhole, hoping to prevent them from throwing a grenade in on us. I saw a German heading straight at me, yelling, "Raus mit der Hand, raus mit der Hand." My body was frozen in fear, and I could not get my hands up. He jabbed at me with his bayonet, and it hit the button on my field jacket and sliced my jacket's left shoulder. He retracted and was going to stick me again when I was able to get my hands up. And that is when my status changed from a combat infantryman to a prisoner of war. Every ex-POW that I have encountered has told a different story of his capture and subsequent treatment. However, they have all reported the feeling of humiliation and shock. The most asked question of an ex-POW is, what was it like? Well, allow me to summarize an answer only reflecting on my prison experience. The first is hunger. A hunger that is forced on you from the lack of food for months on end. A hunger that will force you to eat anything and everything that is available. The second is being cold. A cold that racks your body in uncontrollable shivering and causes your mind to become dull. Fear, a nameless terror that takes control of your body and mind. A fear where you lose control of your body functions as bombs fall on you in locked boxcars. Fear of catching a horrible disease that is running rampant in the camp, and you know there are no medicines or medical personnel that can help you. The worst fear, of course, is never again being free and seeing your loved ones. Depression is the fourth effect on the mind. Thoughts of family and home lock your mind in endless daydreams, wondering and worrying if they know you are alive. This perhaps is one of the cruelest of tortures. There's a fifth question asked of me. I'm Jewish. Do they know? Well, you all know what Hitler did to the Jews and the resulting Holocaust. Yes, this thought was in the back of my mind, but honestly, I had too many other fears to worry about. As to the question if they knew, the question is yes and no. Let me explain. Yes, they know, and I didn't know they knew. Why? Well, here. When I was first captured, my interrogator, a graduate of Penn State University and spoke perfect English, asked me my religion. I replied atheist because I had destroyed my dog tags just prior to being captured. Why? Because they had an H on them for Hebrew. During World War II, all faiths had their religion stamped on your dog tag for the chaplain's use in the event of your death. I left it at that, thinking I had fooled them. It was only later, after my liberation by the Russians, I found my prison record and discovered I hadn't fooled anyone, as it was plainly indicated Jew written across the face of it. After being captured, I was forced march for 3 days on frozen feet, no food, no water, made to lie down in the snow and frozen fields at night with no shelter, and my field jacket was my outer covering, and the temperature never getting above freezing. About the fourth day, about 40 miles from where I was captured, I was packed with 65 other GIs into a boxcar, which would normally hold 40 men. Our car had previously contained horses, and the manure was still covering the thin layer of straw on the floor. We were so tight that it was impossible to sit down. On Christmas Eve, our train was in a rail yard, and the IRF bombed us. Many cars were destroyed with many casualties. Others unlocked my car, and we all sought shelter on the embankments. After the raid, we were forced back onto the train. This boxcar was my home for the next 7 days. As the wounded died, we stacked them erect in the corner, which gave us a little bit more room. We had no food or water for the first 3 days, and many became delirious. Then we were allowed to pass our helmets out for water, and a loaf of black bread for each group of 5 men. Well, of course, you know what our helmets have been used for during this time. All of us came down with dysentery, which made the situation even worse. In the next 10 days, I was transported to 2 different prison camps, each further east. The last was along the Oder River on the Polish border. I was just getting settled into an old German army camp being used for a prison camp when the Russians started their winter offensive, and the Germans forced us to vacate the camp on a 2-hour notice. Years later, I learned we were to be used as bargaining chips. And all this time, I was fighting the effects of frozen feet with no medication or medical help. And due to the swelling, I was unable to wear my combat boots. With the help of another GI, who donated the bottom part of his overcoat, I made booties to wrap around my feet and was able to shuffle along on the icy roads with 5,000 Americans on a 110-mile forced trip with the temperature barely getting above 0. As we shuffled along through the villages, the children would throw stones, sick their dogs on us, women would dump water on us from the 2nd story to add to our misery. And any defensive action that we would take would result in being bayoneted or shot. Many of my fellow POWs did not complete that march. During those 10 days, we slept in the open fields, huddled together in each other's arms to keep from freezing to death, and guarded by vicious German Shepherd and Doberman dogs. At night, we crawled around and found the animal dung heaps and dug up potatoes and turnips that the farmers had buried for the winter in order to keep them from freezing. We scrubbed them on our clothing to be able to eat them raw. For water, we scooped up snow and melted it in our mouths. And to this day, I cannot eat the skin of a potato. Upon arrival in our new camp just south of Berlin, we were issued 2 thin blankets housed in circus tents, which had 2 inches of straw, no heat, and each held about 500 men. Well, this was my home from early February until I was liberated by the Russians in the latter part of April 1945. Our daily rations consisted of a cup of hot water in the morning, a thin soup, and if lucky, sometimes a piece of wild boar with the skin and fur still on it for lunch, followed by another cup of hot water for dinner. Every 3 days, a 1-pound loaf of black bread made with 50% sawdust and tree bark was issued to 5 men to supplement our diet. Once in a while, we got a pat of lard, substituted as a treat. Every 3 weeks or so, a 10-pound Red Cross parcel was issued to 5 men to share, consisting of an 8-ounce can of powdered milk, a spoon of jam, 10 crackers, a small wedge of cheese, a small can of meat spread, a packet of instant coffee, and 5 cigarettes. Now, I would like to tell you about some of the things about our daily prison life. There were many activities and situations that arose that we did in order to keep our spirits up and our depression down. Unfortunately, these were not always successful and did not work for everyone. We lost many good men as they became sick or delirious and gave up the will to live and ended up on our boot hill. The first of these events that introduced me to prison life happened at my first prison camp, as I was being shuttled from camp to camp and further east. I was housed in a Stalag 4B with a group of New Zealand prisoners who had been captured in North Africa in the British campaign against Rommel. During these 3 years of captivity, they developed a method of smuggling mail out of the camp. So in addition to giving me a crash course on how to survive as a POW, they had me and my buddy fill out 2 postcards to send home to let them know that we were prisoners of war. My folks received the first of these cards 5 months later, and after verification by the War Department that they were the real thing, my status was changed from an MIA to a POW. 14 months later, I was home, and our postman rang the door and handed me the second card and congratulated me on writing to myself. My POW buddy's family never received any of his cards, which were sent out at the same time. And to this day, the mystery of how they got there is unsolved. In our Red Cross parcels, we received every 3 or 4 weeks for groups of 5 men was a half-pound powdered milk in a tin container. And from the 5,000 American POWs in this camp, there emerged engineering talent that made blowers to the heat of food, plates, cups, utensils of all types, and many of these items are on display at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Others became master chefs, and from our meager rations created mouth-watering meals for their family of 5. There were many of these family groups, and we traded amongst ourselves, and I was fortunate to be a part of one of them. Everyone in the group contributed. I was the trader for my group. In each Red Cross parcel, there were 5 cigarettes, and we pooled ours for trading with other groups and trading at the fence with friendly guards. Since I knew a little Yiddish, similar to German, from when my grandmother lived with us, I became the trader for our group, and went to the barbed wire fence and traded for food. I was not always successful, as we had to make sure the guard was not a wounded SS soldier, because they would shoot you for no reason. They were mean. The main fence was 10 foot high, with a 4-foot space between the next compound fence and for the guards to walk in. 6 foot in front of that fence was a 1-foot high strand of barbed wire, and that space between was called no man's land, and the guards could and would shoot a prisoner if found in that space in front of the main fence. We traders would go out at night during air raids when the searchlights would be turned off. On one particular night, I was out doing my thing, trying to get a loaf of bread and not having much success in negotiating a cigarette price. Finally, we had a deal and I handed over my cigarettes, but before I could grab the bread, the lights came on. I hightailed it over the barrier and was running for the tent when the tower guard opened up with his machine gun. I didn't look back, but I still believe his slugs were at my heels. I dove into the tent, much to the wrath of the tent commander, but more so to the guys whose cigarettes were left behind. Needless to say, from that time on, I kept one ear open, listening to when I could no longer hear the B-17 engines. We also had a justice system. The greatest crime was stealing food from a fellow prisoner. If caught, the perpetrator was tried with a 3-judge panel of senior NCOs and a jury composed of equal rank of the accused. If found guilty, he was tossed into the latrine pit and shunned and forced to be alone. It was a great deterrent for stealing. For entertainment, we had lice betting parties. 2 individuals would remove lice from their body in a specified time. In order for the lice to be counted, it had to be cracked between your thumb and thumbnails. As gross as this seems in retrospect, it was a very competitive scene, with many participants vying for the half-cigarette bet. There was much betting with whooping and hollering, and reminded one of a sporting event. As I said before, a lot of talent showed up amongst the prisoners. We had groups that made crystal radio sets to get the latest news from the BBC. The sets were broken down among 3 or 4 men who would gather together at a certain time, put them together, and then get the news. It was in this manner that we learned about FDR's death, and although forbidden, we Americans assembled and sang God Bless America and our national anthem for what seemed like hours, until the Germans broke us up with their rifle butts. We also learned U.S. troops had crossed the Rhine, but had fought up to and stopped at the Elbe River. That was how we discovered that we were 150 miles east of the Elbe and inside Russian-occupied Germany. Most of our daily activity consisted of walking the fence, thinking and talking about food and home, and trying to keep from freezing to death. Most of us wondered what the Germans were going to do with us. Those were a few of the things that kept us going. Not all were successful, and many a man was broken in spirit and lost the will to live and never came home. There was one waterspout connection in the American compound for 5,000 men, and the men would line up all day to get a cup of water for personal hygiene. As I mentioned, this was an American compound, as each nationality was separated by huge fences. There were 7 of these compounds in this camp, with a total of 60,000 prisoners. One day in April, an American prisoner was forced to line up. All American prisoners were forced to line up in front of our tents, in column of 5s. The Germans then ordered all Jews to step forward. Immediately, a whispered command was passed through the ranks. No one stepped forward. The Germans went crazy, threatening to shoot everyone. After an hour or so of this carrying on, another whispered command went through the ranks. Everyone stepped forward. Of course, this made the Germans even more violent, and we were forced to stand out in the rain all day without our meager rations. This was my only experience for being a Jew, but was the formation of a bond of friendship formed behind enemy barbed wire that exists to this day. Why the Germans never looked at my prison record, only the good Lord knows. Other American GIs were not so unfortunate, and many were sent to the mines or death camps. Approximately a week after this incident, we again were forced out in front of our tents. We noticed extra guards and machine guns had been placed in the guard towers. The German officers were arguing for many hours. None of us knew what was happening. And it was only years later I learned and verified by the International Red Cross that Hitler had ordered American prisoners of war to be shot that day. On the morning of April 22nd, we heard artillery and gunfire not far away. We didn't know whose it was. A big tank came down alongside the fence and made a sharp right turn, flattened the fence. And when the turret opened, a large, furry black hat emerged with a toothless face and exclaimed, "Ruski!" Well, you can imagine the pandemonium that erupted through the camp as the realization settled in that we were freed. After the Russians liberated us, they indicated we Americans would be sent back to U.S. military control by way of Odessa on the Black Sea, some 1,500 miles to the east. But we knew from the makeshift radios that the American Army was only 150 miles to the west on the Elbe River. Of course, we didn't know that they had stopped there for the Potsdam Agreement with the Russians. For the next 2 weeks, the Russians made no attempt to contact the Americans. Russians were not too kind to us, worse to the German population. We had to forage for our own food, and you can imagine the chaos with over 60,000 men of all nationalities from the prison camp running amok through the villages and farms looking for food. I among them, raiding farmhouses, catching chickens, killed them on the spot. We cooked them on open fires and then tried to eat them. We discovered our stomachs had shrunk so much that we could not digest regular food. With the Russians not making any attempt to contact Americans, I joined 6 other GI infantrymen. We armed ourselves with weapons some friendly Russians gave us, and we decided to set out to find the American lines. A tank driver gave us a map of Europe with a colored pen indicating where he thought the fighting was still going on. And with this information and the stars, we made our way through German and Russian lines, traveling at night, sleeping in barns and abandoned buildings for about 150 miles. We finally found the Americans on the west side of the Elbe River on the day that Germany surrendered, May 8, 1945. And I like to think that they surrendered when they heard I was about to rejoin the American Army. My return to American military control did not go smoothly. You can imagine how I looked. I was in the same uniform I had been captured in, and it was now greasy black. Heavy beard, long hair way before it became fashionable, and looked just like the thousands of refugees jamming the roads to get away from the Russians. Only I had a weapon. We spotted an American truck some 500 miles ahead of us and fired our weapons into the air to attract their attention. They stopped, turned their .50 caliber machine gun on us, and fired a couple of bursts, thankfully not hitting us. We screamed that we were American POWs and that they ordered me, the most forward one, to come ahead and identify myself. I was asked my hometown, replied, Gary, Indiana. Then he asked me what high school I went to, which I thought was kind of strange. Upon answering Lew Wallace High, he said the most beautiful words I've ever heard. Come on in, soldier. Your high school beat my high school for this year's Indiana State Basketball Championship. And at that moment, my designator changed from prisoner of war to a GI once again. After being transported to a POW collection point, I showered, was deloused, given a fresh uniform, started to look like a GI once again. Went to the barber shop, got all the curly locks cut off, gave my overseas cap that jaunty tilt, and started to feel pretty good about myself. I went to the camp infirmary and I tipped the scales at just over 100 pounds. That meant I lost some 65 pounds during my prison experience. Our experience as POWs are absolutely unknown to most Americans and other veterans, ones that we cannot forget. We can't even explain what it was like to our closest friends and family. Living as close to death for as long as we did, we learned certain fundamental truths. We learned the real difference between good and bad, and we learned to judge human beings by absolute standards and what real friendship is. These are the things that we cannot forget and have become a part of our lives. Today, most of us former prisoners of war are plagued with recurring nightmares and always those nagging questions. What was it all for? What good did it do? And finally, does anybody care? For me, the answers have come by revisiting battlefields, talking to the people whose lives were liberated, by the monuments that have been erected both here and abroad, and by the people who honor all veterans, the living, the missing, and the dead. Thank you very much.
Went on 3 fronts, whipped their butts and come home.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That was, I think we have, do we have time for a couple of questions and answers? We have a little bit of time because they didn't go nearly as long as I thought they would. But it was good. It was excellent. So do we got a little bit of time for question and answer? Do we have some? Back there? Oh. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever forgive the Germans like my husband forgave the Japanese?
I can't hear the question.
She asked if you ever did forgive the Germans, like her husband, Miss Fraser, her husband, Glenn Fraser had forgiven the Japanese, and she asked, did you do
No, I have never forgiven them. On many trips that we took back to Europe, I would never go back to Germany. On the many trips that we went back to Europe, I would never go back to Germany. I would take a hotel room and my family would do the traveling, then they'd come back and meet me.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the name of your book?
The name of the book that I have written is called Kriege. And Kriege was the shortness of Kriegsgefangenen, which is German for prisoner of war. And it's Kriege 312330, and it is in the Library of Congress. It was never written for purposes to sell. There was only one organization that I allowed to use the book as a selling tool. That was the Rolling Thunder here of Alabama 1, and they used it for charity only. And that was the only reason that I allowed that. But the book was really written for my family and my friends, because for years they were told never to ask me about my experiences. And because of that, then finally I sat down and wrote the book.
Right?
Like, for the gentleman that landed at D-Day, what was the name of the beach that you landed on?
You want to know what the name of the beach you landed on? And
It was Normandy Beach, just out south of Akron.
And you were the medic, is that correct?
I was one of the medics.
Okay, can you tell me, what type procedures did y'all do as medics? Were you trained medically?
Well, I had to go to Paris, Texas. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I had to go to Paris, Texas after I was drafted and spend 6 weeks. And I got everything from tying your fingers together right on down to whatever you got to do to stop the blood over the shoulder. And of course, what we were told is we would never be able to stop blood if it was cut all the way through your shoulder. In other words, we were fighting a losing battle because, I mean, after all, the person was dead by the time we got him.
So 6 weeks training.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
You were a medic.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, ma'am.
What is the difference between a medic and a corpsman?
Navy. Army and Navy. Anybody else? She's asking if each one of you would say how long were you in the service?
They still ask me how long that, but as soon as the war was over, Curtis Hance got out. I was tired of fighting that took blood, because that's all we did was try to stop blood. And of course, a lot. I've been told that 80% of the people that blood came in on the ambulances, they were dead when they got to us. We just put them behind the tent where we, on that 80-acre field that you see out there.
How long were you in? Your length of service?
I was in the Navy 2 years, 5 months,
Hold on,
18.
close.
Got it?
There you go.
I was in the Navy 2 years, 5 months, and 18 days. I was in the Army and the Air Force 2 years, 5 months, and 13 days. I was in the National Guard for 4 years. And I only got out of the National Guard because the job that I was in was traveling, and I could not bring myself to be at camp with them, and they had nothing to do with me all year long.
I was in 2 years, 11 months, 48 days.
Thank y'all for your service. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, thank you. And now I reveal Captain Joe Snowden, United States Coast Guard, retired, and he's director, I think, of Executive Director of Administrative Services. He has a presentation. Joe?
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? All right. It is absolutely amazing to listen to these stories. Coming from a long line of veterans myself, both my grandparents retired Army officers from World War II in Korea. My father, 20-year retired Navy veteran from 2 tours in Vietnam. And then myself, I have no wartime whatsoever, but 32 years in service. But I didn't face what these gentlemen had to face. Mine was a simple sit down by my father when I was a junior in high school. He goes, Joe, I didn't put any money away as an enlisted man. I didn't make a lot of money, so I know you want to go to college. But don't worry, I have 4 options for you. Think about them: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine. So I enlisted in the Army National Guard, and that became the beginning of my career. But we're here to really honor these gentlemen here for their sacrifice and service to our nation. And the mayor personally, Mayor Stimson, wanted me to personally come down and present them with what I have here are keys to the city. Now, keys to the city are very symbolic. As tradition goes, a lot of the cities back in ancient times were surrounded by walls. And during the day, you had the watchman on the wall, and at night, they'd button everything up and lock everything up. And only certain trusted people were given keys to the city because that was the security and the peace that the citizens were able to enjoy. So they were only given to those people. And I can't think of any 3 better people to give the keys to the city to, the people that ensured our freedom and our security. So with this, I'd like to present each one of you a city key to the city on behalf of Mayor Stimson. Thank you very much.
The president of the DAR House Board, Sandra Rackard.
Thank you, Pete. It is our honor today to share the day with you, gentlemen. And I would like to tell you that I was a 5-week-old baby when y'all went to war. So I really appreciate your service. I would have grown up not knowing the America that some people knew, that you knew before the war. But today I want to present each of you with a certificate from the Friends Foundation. Carol May, the president of the Friends Foundation, hosted this event. We're just so honored to have you, and this is for Mr. Curtis Hess. And it will stand if you want to just stand it right there. And this certificate is for Mr. Chester Feagin. Just pull that, yeah, there you go. And this certificate is for Cy Lichtenfeld.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
and thank all of
Thank
y'all
you.
for your service. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Get Terry Tomlinson with the Friends Foundation to come up, please.
I'd like to extend an invitation to everyone today to come back on September 11th. We have Charles Parmenter. He will be talking about Augusta Evans. And she is a lady of Mobile, former lady of Mobile, and the first lady in America to sell over $100,000 in books. It's going to be a great talk, and Charles Parmenter is always wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Okay, anyway, thank you, Pete. Always do a wonderful job. We appreciate you. Someone with whose integrity is the kind of person we need to help lead our nation. Remember that, November. Okay. Also, many of you are involved in veteran activities. I know in the groups that I'm in, we are always doing things for them with pleasure. And we have here today someone who just won a national award from News Nation, and that is Fran Barber. Fran, I thank you. You will never go to a veterans event that she is not there. And she is remarkable in her diligence, and her commitment to that is something we all strive for. Congratulations to you. We're so happy. And thank you for coming today from the training center. We appreciate the Coast Guard. Thank you, Joe, so much for what you've done. And of course, many of you know he is a professor as well, Mr. Sermon. But anyway, we appreciate you. And so before you leave, we know you're dying of starvation. We would like for you to go into the dining room where we have a cake and all kind of good things for you to eat and to drink. Are there any questions about anything? If you're interested in becoming a Friends member, you can see me, Terry, Dottie. We would love to sign you up. Thank you so much for coming.